In the sweltering summer of 1892, the quiet mill town of Fall River, Massachusetts, awoke to a nightmare. A prominent local businessman and his wife were found hacked to death in their own home. A gruesome crime that would captivate the nation. Whispers of Lizzie Borden took an axe, echoed in schoolyard rhymes, casting the shadow of infamy over a 32-year-old Sunday school teacher. Lizzie Andrew Borden, prim and soft-spoken, stood accused of the unthinkable, brutally murdering her father and stepmother with a hatchet. The ensuing trial became a spectacle of the Gilded Age, leaving Americans divided in the truth shrouded in mystery. Was Lizzie a cold-blooded killer who gave her mother 40 whacks, or an unfortunate woman trapped in a web of circumstantial evidence? More than a century later, her name remains synonymous with one of the most puzzling murder cases in American history. In this narrative, we delve into Lizzie's world, her childhood, the day of the crime, and her later life and death, to trace the arc of a tale that has become legend. With each twist, the story of Lizzie Borden blurs the line between guilt and innocence, leaving us in suspense until the very end. The Borden family home at 92 2nd Street in Fall River, Massachusetts, was a modest two-story house, a far cry from the Grand Hill neighborhood where the city's elite resided. Lizzie Borden was born on July 19, 1860, the younger of two daughters in a family soon touched by tragedy. When Lizzie was not yet 3 years old, her mother, Sarah Anthony Borden, died, leaving Lizzie and her 9-year-old sister, Emma, in the care of their austere father, Andrew Borden. Family lore holds that on her deathbed, Sarah made Emma promise to always look after little Lizzie. From that day on, Emma became more than a sister. She was a protective figure, dutifully keeping watch over Lizzie as they grew up. Andrew Borden was a self-made man of substantial wealth, but he was notoriously frugal. He had earned his fortune in property development, banking, and textile mills, amassing an estate worth the equivalent of millions. Yet the Borden house lacked even basic modern amenities. No electricity and no indoor plumbing, despite such comforts becoming common for the well-to-do. Andrew remarried a woman named Abby Gray in 1865, a decision that would ripple through Lizzie's life like a growing storm. While it was assumed that Lizzie, as the family's youngest child, would be coddled and protected by her doting father, her childhood was instead filled with emotional neglect and tension. Andrew Borden was a stern, domineering businessman who made his fortune in real estate and local industry, but his wealth was often overshadowed by his frugality and obsession with maintaining appearances. He didn't give his daughters the luxuries that their wealth could afford, opting instead to live in a modest house that seemed to reflect his personality, cold, practical, and without warmth. Lizzie's relationship with her stepmother, Abby, was strained. In the eyes of many, Abby was more of a stranger than a mother figure, and it seemed that Lizzie never truly accepted her into the family. To Lizzie, Abby was a woman who came into her life and took her mother's place, an unforgivable act in the eyes of a young girl who still carried the grief of losing her biological mother. The tension between Lizzie and Abby often became apparent, especially as Lizzie grew older and found herself seeking companionship and affection outside of the confines of her home. Despite her father's wealth, Lizzie led a somewhat reclusive life, spending most of her days in the family's house or at the local church. In the rigid social structure of Fall River, where appearances were everything, Lizzie became an outsider. Her few friendships were fleeting, and many people noted that she was emotionally distant. She was often seen as an enigma, neither a social butterfly nor a misfit, but someone who existed in the shadows of a family marred by secrets. The pressures of her upbringing weighed heavily on Lizzie, and the cracks in her world began to widen. Lizzie's relationship with her father grew even more tumultuous, and the sense of alienation she felt from her stepmother only deepened as the years went by. Her father, despite his fortune, was unrelenting in his criticism and seemingly incapable of offering love or affection. In a household governed by discipline and cold efficiency, Lizzie became increasingly withdrawn. Lizzie's childhood, defined by her strained family relationships and a constant undercurrent of tension, set the stage for the terrible events that would unfold in 1892. The haunting remnants of her past would not remain hidden for long. Her own story, filled with suppressed emotions and unresolved trauma, would ultimately converge with a violent and tragic night that would leave her forever linked to a gruesome crime. It was a hot summer's day in 1892, and the air in Fall River felt heavy with the weight of impending doom. On the morning of August 4th, the Borden family home, located at 92 2nd Street, was eerily quiet. Lizzie Borden, her father Andrew, and her stepmother Abby were all in the house, but the family had been living in a tense standoff for some time. It was on this day, a day like no other, that the quiet tension exploded into violence, forever cementing Lizzie's name in the annals of American criminal history. The murders of Andrew and Abby Borden remain one of the most chilling and perplexing unsolved mysteries in American history. Lizzie Borden, the daughter who appeared to be a passive, reserved figure, was suddenly thrust into the center of a bloody crime scene. It was Andrew, the father, who was the first victim. Andrew had been found slumped over on a couch in the sitting room, his skull crushed with a violent blow. His face was almost unrecognizable, his life snuffed out by the brutal swing of an axe. Just upstairs, Abby Borden had been similarly attacked. She was discovered in a pool of her own blood, sprawled across the guest bedroom floor, her face similarly destroyed by the sharp edge of an axe. Both victims had been struck repeatedly, their injuries too severe to allow for any quick death. The brutality of the crime stunned the entire community. Andrew and Abby Borden had been killed in the most violent and savage manner imaginable, and their deaths left an indelible mark on Fall River. Lizzie's presence at the scene of the crime was noted almost immediately. She claimed to have been in the barn at the time of the murders, but she was the only one left alive in the house, and the evidence, though circumstantial, was beginning to mount against her. She was quickly accused of the murders, though she vehemently denied any involvement. It was the cold, calculated nature of the crime that raised suspicions. The Borden murders appeared to be personal, and there were few signs of a struggle or break-in. Lizzie had the opportunity, the means, and, perhaps most disturbingly, the motive. But what drove Lizzie Borden to commit such an atrocious act? Was it a crime of passion, a response to years of abuse and repression? Or was it something darker, something that could only be explained by the shadows that lurked beneath Lizzie's seemingly calm exterior? Despite the mounting evidence, Lizzie Borden was never convicted of the murders. The trial, which began in the summer of 1893, was filled with inconsistencies and contradictions. Lizzie's defense argued that there was insufficient evidence to convict her, and the prosecution struggled to tie her to the crime in any definitive way. Lizzie's odd behavior, her strange calmness in the face of such horrific events, only added fuel to the fire of speculation. Ultimately, Lizzie Borden was acquitted of all charges. She left the courtroom a free woman, but the whispers surrounding her name would never fade. She was never arrested again for the murders, but the shadow of suspicion followed her for the rest of her life. Was she guilty, or was she the victim of a faulty justice system? The truth was never fully known, but the mystery of Lizzie Borden's crime would remain unsolved, haunting Fall River in the public imagination for decades to come. Though Lizzie Borden was acquitted of the murders of her father and stepmother, her life after the trial was far from peaceful. The public's fascination with her only grew, and she became an infamous figure in American history. However, Lizzie was not able to escape the weight of her past. The whispers and rumors surrounding her actions never ceased, and the shadow of suspicion followed her wherever she went. In the years following the trial, Lizzie attempted to live a quiet life, but she could never fully escape the stain of her family's tragic deaths. She moved out of her old family home and purchased a new mansion in Fall River, but her new life was far from glamorous. Lizzie was shunned by much of the community, and she found herself increasingly isolated. Her wealth, once inherited from her father, was dwindling, and her reputation remained tarnished. She was a woman whose life was defined by one single event, a crime that was never fully explained, and a legacy that could not be erased. Lizzie's later years were marked by physical and emotional decline. In 1927, she was diagnosed with hernia problems and endured several surgeries, but her health continued to deteriorate. She lived in a somewhat reclusive manner, relying on her sister Emma, who had distanced herself from Lizzie after the trial, to care for her. Lizzie's health, both mental and physical, began to break down. She suffered from what many believed to be the psychological toll of her crime. Or perhaps the psychological weight of being accused and never fully exonerated. Lizzie Borden passed away on June 1st, 1927, at the age of 66. Her death was the end of a troubled and enigmatic life. In her later years, Lizzie was never truly able to escape the shadow of her infamous past. She died alone, having never truly found peace. Her grave, which lies in the Oak Grove Cemetery in Fall River, is a stark reminder of the woman who would forever be associated with one of the most gruesome and perplexing crimes in American history. Though Lizzie Borden's death ended her personal suffering, the mystery of her involvement in the murders remained unresolved. Over the years, numerous theories have arisen regarding her guilt. Some believe she was a victim of a miscarriage of justice, while others argue that she was the cold-blooded killer who got away with murder. And as the years passed, the story of Lizzie Borden only grew more mystifying, inspiring books, plays, and films. The question still lingers. Did Lizzie Borden commit the crime? Or did someone else hide behind the walls of the Borden house, never to be uncovered? In the end, Lizzie Borden's life, much like the murders, remains an enigma, a puzzle that may never be solved. Was she a murderer who cleverly outwitted the justice system? Or was she the victim of an unfair and biased trial? The question may never be answered, but the real mystery may lie in the chilling possibility that Lizzie Borden did, in fact, murder her parents. Not out of malicious intent, but as the result of years of repressed emotion, twisted family dynamics, and the suffocating pressures of a stifling, emotionally abusive home. Perhaps the true horror of the Borden case lies not in the brutality of the murders, but in the twisted, unresolved grief of a woman who was never truly given the chance to heal. The axe, after all, may not have been the only thing that severed the ties between Lizzie and her family. Perhaps in the end, it was the crushing weight of her own past that led to the most tragic and unimaginable act of all. If you enjoyed this journey into history's dark mysteries, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell for more untold stories.